You know it before anyone tells you. Something about the way the world lands on you is different. A song does not just play. It moves through your chest like weather. A conversation does not just end. It stays in your body for hours, replaying not the words but the weight behind them. A look from a stranger can shift your entire afternoon. A single sentence from someone you love can open a door inside you that takes days to close. You have been told about this your whole life. You are too sensitive. You take things too personally. You need thicker skin. And every time you hear it, part of you believes it, because the world seems to confirm it constantly. Other people absorb the same input and move on. You absorb it, and it stays. Other people hear criticism and adjust. You hear criticism and carry it home like something alive, turning it over and over in your mind long after the person who said it has forgotten it entirely. But here is the part that most people never explain to you. What you are experiencing is not a flaw in your emotional system. It is a feature of your nervous system. You are not reacting incorrectly. You are processing more deeply. And the difference between those two things changes everything about how this experience should be understood. The reason some people feel everything more intensely is not psychological in the way most people assume. It is neurological, and the science behind it is more specific than the vague label of sensitive might suggest. Research in developmental neuroscience has identified measurable differences in how certain brains process sensory and emotional input. In these nervous systems, the regions responsible for emotional processing, particularly the amygdala and the insula, respond with greater activation to the same stimuli that produce moderate responses in other brains. This is not a choice. It is not a habit. It is architecture. The brain was built to process at this depth, and it has been doing so since before the person had any say in the matter. What this means in practical terms is that a person with this wiring does not just feel emotions more strongly, they detect more. Their nervous system picks up subtlety that other systems are designed to filter out. The slight change in someone's voice, the almost imperceptible shift in the energy of a room, the emotional undertone of a text message that most people would read and forget. All of this registers. All of it is processed. And all of it is felt, not as background information, but as foreground experience, vivid and immediate and demanding of attention. This is why telling someone like this to just let it go is not only unhelpful, it is neurologically meaningless. Their brain is not holding on because of a decision. It is holding on because the system is built to process thoroughly. And thorough processing takes time. The emotion does not leave faster because you want it to. It leaves when the nervous system has finished doing what it was designed to do, which is to extract every layer of meaning from the experience before releasing it. Asking it to hurry is like asking the lungs to breathe less carefully. The system doesn't know how to comply. It only knows how to do what it does. And this processing doesn't shut off when the person goes to sleep. For many people who feel intensely, dreams are vivid, emotionally dense, and often indistinguishable from waking experience in their impact. They wake up carrying the emotional residue of events that never happened. A dream about being abandoned can produce a grief that persists through the morning. A dream about conflict can leave the body tense and guarded for hours. The nervous system does not distinguish between real and imagined input when it comes to emotional weight. It processes both with the same thoroughness. And the person begins each day having already carried something before the world has asked them to carry anything at all. One of the earliest and most formative experiences for someone who feels everything intensely is the discovery that their internal world does not match the external response. They are 5 years old and something small happens. A toy breaks. A friend says something careless. A parent raises their voice briefly and then moves on. And inside the child, the experience is enormous. Not theatrically, genuinely. The sadness is vast. The confusion is physical. The feeling does not pass in minutes. It lingers for hours, coloring everything else that happens that day. But the world around them has already moved on. The parent has forgotten. The friend is playing again. The broken toy has been replaced. And the child, still carrying the full weight of the experience inside their body, begins to understand something that will shape the rest of their life. What I feel does not match what is happening around me. And because children are not equipped to question the world, they question themselves instead. This is where the internal narrative begins. Something is wrong with me. I feel too much. I need to be less. And that narrative, once it takes root, becomes the filter through which every subsequent emotional experience is processed. Every intense reaction is followed by self-judgment. Every tear is followed by shame. Every moment of deep feeling is accompanied by the quiet suspicion that the depth itself is the problem. That if they could just feel less, they would finally be normal. Finally be easy. Finally be the kind of person the world does not have to handle carefully. This narrative can run for decades without being challenged, and the damage it does is not dramatic. It is erosive. It slowly teaches the person to distrust the one system that is actually giving them accurate information about the world. Their own sensitivity. The very instrument that allows them to notice what others miss, to feel what others skim past, to detect meaning at a depth most people never access, becomes the thing they are most ashamed of. And that shame does not reduce the intensity. It just adds another layer to it. Now they are not only feeling deeply, they are feeling deeply about feeling deeply. And the weight doubles. What makes this particularly cruel is that the people delivering the message are almost never trying to cause harm. Parents who say, "Stop crying," usually want the child to feel better. Friends who say, "You are overthinking it," usually want to offer reassurance. Teachers who say, "Toughen up," usually believe they are preparing the child for the world. But the impact of these messages does not match their intent. What the child absorbs is not comfort. It is confirmation that the way they experience reality is wrong. And a child who grows up believing their emotional responses are errors spends the rest of their life trying to correct something that was never broken. Trying to feel less. Trying to react less. Trying to be someone whose nervous system operates at a volume it was never designed to reach. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that belongs to people who feel everything intensely. It is not the tiredness of physical labor or sleep deprivation. It is the tiredness of a system that never fully powers down. For most people, daily experience arrives at a volume that the nervous system can process in the background. Emotions register, are noted, and are released. The system returns to baseline relatively quickly between stimuli. But for people whose processing runs deeper, the return to baseline is slower. Each experience takes longer to metabolize. Each emotional input requires more neurological resources to complete its cycle. And because life does not pause to wait for the processing to finish, new input arrives on top of incomplete processing, which arrives on top of the last incomplete cycle before that. Over time, this creates a cumulative load that is invisible from the outside. The person looks functional. They are often more than functional. They are perceptive, creative, insightful, and deeply engaged with the world. But inside, The system is running at capacity almost continuously. There is no idle state. There is no moment where the mind is simply resting without working through something. Even leisure feels layered. A film does not just entertain. It opens emotional corridors that remain active long after the screen goes dark. A simple walk through a crowded street is not just movement. It is an intake of hundreds of micro-impressions, faces, tones, postures, energies, all of which the nervous system faithfully records and begins to process. This is why people who feel deeply often need more solitude than others expect, not because they are antisocial, because their system requires more recovery time between inputs. The solitude is not withdrawal, it is metabolic. It is the nervous system finally being given the quiet it needs to finish what it started. And without that quiet, the system does not crash. It does something subtler and more dangerous. It begins to numb. Not because the person has healed, but because the system, overwhelmed by unprocessed input, starts reducing its own sensitivity in order to survive the volume. And that numbing, when it arrives, feels like loss. Because the person did not choose to feel less. Their body simply could not sustain feeling that much without intervention. And the numbing creates its own kind of grief. Because for someone whose identity has always been tied to the depth of their feeling, losing access to that depth feels like losing themselves. They know something is wrong not because they are in pain, but because they are not. The absence of their usual intensity does not feel like peace. It feels like silence where music used to be. And that silence, if it persists long enough, can be more frightening than the overwhelm that preceded it. Because overwhelm at least meant the system was still working. Numbness means the system has started shutting down, the very thing that made them who they are. There is a paradox that sits at the center of this experience. People who feel everything intensely are often the ones others turn to for emotional support. And they are often remarkably good at providing it, because their system is built to detect subtlety. They notice when someone is struggling before a word is spoken. They sense the shift. They hear the thing beneath the thing. They know how to sit with pain without rushing to fix it, because they understand from the inside what it feels like to carry something heavy, while the world tells you to move on. This makes them extraordinary listeners, extraordinary partners, extraordinary friends. They offer a quality of presence that most people have never experienced. And the people in their lives often describe them the same way. I feel more understood by you than by anyone else. But the paradox is this. The same system that makes them so attuned to others makes it difficult for others to be equally attuned to them. Because the depth at which they experience emotion is not a depth most people know how to meet. When they try to share what they feel, the response is often well-meaning but shallow. That is a lot. I do not know what to say to that. Maybe you are overthinking it. And the person who is reaching for connection retreats quietly, not in anger, in recognition. The recognition that what they carry inside is not the same size as what most people are equipped to hold. And that recognition, repeated across years and relationships, teaches them to be the container for everyone else, while rarely, if ever, being contained themselves. This is one of the great hidden costs of emotional intensity. The people who feel the most are often the least held, not because they are unlovable, but because the scale of their inner world is difficult to match. And the loneliness that comes from being constantly and deeply attuned to others, while rarely being met at the same depth, is a specific and quiet kind of ache that does not have a simple solution. It only has recognition. And recognition, when it arrives, can be the beginning of something that loneliness alone could never produce. Because when someone who feels everything intensely finally encounters a person who can hold what they carry without flinching, without minimizing, without trying to fix it, the experience is not just comforting, it is transformative. The nervous system, for perhaps the first time, receives the signal it has been waiting for since childhood. You do not have to be less. You can bring all of it here. And that signal, simple as it sounds, can begin to undo decades of the opposite message. Not instantly, not completely, but enough to shift the internal experience from, I am too much for this world, to, there are places where I am exactly the right amount. And those places, once discovered, become the ground the person has been searching for without knowing it had a name. There is something that people who feel everything intensely eventually have the opportunity to learn, though the learning is neither quick nor painless. That their sensitivity is not the problem. It never was. The problem was the environment that told them it was. But before that learning arrives, something else deserves to be named. Because the conversation about emotional intensity almost always centers on pain, on overwhelm, on the difficulty of carrying so much. And while that difficulty is real, it is not the whole picture, because the same system that processes pain at extraordinary depth also processes beauty at extraordinary depth, joy at extraordinary depth, love at extraordinary depth. The person who is devastated by a careless comment is the same person who is moved to tears by sunlight hitting a building at the right angle. The person who carries a conversation for days is the same person who can be stopped in the middle of a sidewalk by a piece of music drifting from an open window. The intensity is not selective. It does not apply only to suffering. It applies to everything. And that everything includes moments of wonder, connection, and meaning that most people experience as pleasant, but that the deeply feeling person experiences as sacred. This is the part that rarely gets spoken about. That emotional intensity is not just a heavier life. It is a more textured one, a more vivid one, a life in which the ordinary is never truly ordinary because the system refuses to process anything at the surface. A nervous system that processes deeply is not malfunctioning. It is operating exactly as it was built to operate. The issue was never the depth. It was the absence of a world that could match it. The absence of caregivers who could meet it without flinching. The absence of peers who could sit beside it without needing it to quiet down. The absence of language that could name what was happening inside without framing it as excess. When that language finally arrives, when the person begins to understand that their wiring is not a flaw, but a form of perception, something shifts. Not the intensity itself. That does not change. What changes is the relationship to it. The self-judgment softens. The shame begins to loosen. The constant internal narration of too much, too sensitive, too deep begins to be replaced by something more accurate. This is how my system works. It is not wrong. It is thorough. And the things it gives me, the depth of connection, the richness of experience, the ability to notice what others miss, are not liabilities. They are capacities, rare ones, and they deserve to be treated as such. This shift does not erase the difficulty. Life does not become easier when you stop calling your sensitivity a problem. The volume does not decrease. The processing does not speed up. The world does not suddenly become gentle enough to match what your system requires. But something fundamental changes in how you carry it. You stop fighting your own design. You stop apologizing for the depth of your reactions. You stop shrinking yourself to fit rooms that were built for people who feel less. And you stop measuring your emotional responses against a standard that was never yours to meet. In that stopping, something opens, not outward, inward. A space where the intensity is no longer the enemy, but the instrument. And the person holding it finally stops trying to put it down and starts learning how to use it. If you have lived inside this experience, if you have spent years believing that the way you feel is a problem the world needs you to solve, you are not alone in what you carry. And you are not carrying a defect. You are carrying a nervous system that was built to feel at a depth most people will never access. That depth is not your burden. It is your contribution. And the world, whether it knows it or not, needs exactly what you were built to bring. Not despite the intensity, because of it. If this describes something you have always felt but never heard anyone say without flinching, this channel is for you. It is a space for the deeper patterns of the human mind, the ones that shape everything but rarely get named out loud. If this meant something to you, consider subscribing so you do not miss what comes next. And if you are willing, leave something in the comments, because the people who feel the most are often the ones who speak the least about what it costs. And this is a place where that cost is finally allowed to be real. Thank you for watching.